it was Colchester's largest employer, massively. It powered the engines of the Royal Navy, powered the engines of the railways in this country, the locomotives, and we've got the high-speed train over there, but you can go back 100 years when they were doing the small trains, locomotives on the Hythe, Romney and Dymchurch Railway in Kent. So you've got the whole spectrum. And yes, they were a major part of life at Colchester. Queen's Award for Industry, I recall. 2,500 employees at one time, as massive. And but Colchester had more than Paxman's. We also had the Colchester Lathe Company, we had Brackets, we had Woods of Colchester. So it was absolutely an amazing industrial part of life, and sadly, as you interview me, Paxman's has finished in Colchester, the curtain, the final curtain call. So it's great that the museum here, the East Anglian Railway Museum, has preserved and presenting an important part of Colchester's social life, Colchester's engineering life from the 19th century through the 20th and into the first 20 years of the 21st century.
I'm Will Pavry. I was Managing Director of Paxman from 1987 to 1996. I first joined Paxman in 1979 in the works there.
Tended to travel out a lot at one time, sorting out problems, and did quite a lot on the HST in the early days, and on the HST prototype as well, back in 1973, I think it was. It was 40 hours, and a lot of people worked Saturday mornings as well. Another 4 hours on a Saturday. But, of course, if you got out in the field sorting out problems, it could be all day.
The connections are through my marriage to my wife, rather than me personally. Her father, Frank Blandon, worked in the foundry, as did his father. And Frank Snowy Blandon was the youngest of 12 children, and his father was obviously a lot older than him, so father and son both worked in the foundry. But the added significance is that Edward Blandon, he's featured on one of the displays over there, he was indentured personally by James Paxman, and my sister-in-law, Mary, the third generation to work at Paxman, she worked in the spares department office there at Paxman, third generation. She has this indenture with James Paxman's signature on of Edward Blandon signing on to become an apprentice. Years and years and years later, he's still there in the foundry, and his young son, Frank, joins Paxman's, and Frank was the father of my wife, thus the grandfather of our children, and my father-in-law. So I can't claim the credit, it's all through marriage.
This is amazing, this isn't it? Yeah.
Amazing, that's something fun.
Yeah. Well, so were they scrapping the engine or the...
So the nameplate was where it was put on in 1995.
Yeah.
It went onto that power car because it had the trial, the VP185
That's right,
on it. The power cars, that one there, was then re-engined to a different engine. So the nameplate came off at that stage and went into storage.
So many memories, really. I mean, wonderful people to work with, that's for a start. Fantastic engineering staff.
It was always a very friendly place to work. Everyone was friendly and talked to each other.
My memories really are both in the factory, working with the people in the factory to produce the new engine, the VP185. Also, I spent a lot of time out in America as Managing Director, promoting our business with the US Coast Guard and the US Navy, and that was always very interesting. Travelling around the world, yeah, many very happy memories.
I suppose the favourite memory is travelling around, and sometimes a favourite memory is coming up with an answer to a problem and seeing it work, going to service.
Really the late 1980s was when we started developing the new VP185 engine.
VP185 is a very good engine. and should never have stopped production. I would say.
The mainstay of the company in those days was the Paxman Volunteer engine, which we sold very successfully to the US Coast Guard and the US Navy, and they were really the customers, if you like, that provided the foundation for the success of Paxman in the 1990s.
It was relatively simple and straightforward, but it worked. It was efficient and it lasted well. One of the things that I did, we had on rail traction, we had a surveillance system which you could telephone up and get direct readings when it was running. And it was very interesting to watch how the drivers loaded the power on and what speed they went at. We had everything. We had the GPS on the locos, so you could see where it was and what speed it was doing. And
I think during that time we also saw quite a transition in the company, that the traditional business we had with the Royal Navy was decreasing, so we had to find something to replace that. That's why we introduced this the business in America, which was very successful, and also began to introduce a new engine.
well, it's never that hazardous, but there weren't the same health and safety in those days.
Oh, it was very challenging, yes. I mean, I think we were going through a process of enormous change industrially. We had to go through a process where we were slimming down the company, making it more efficient, bringing in a lot of new manufacturing equipment. Sadly, a lot of people had to leave the company so that it could remain competitive, but we managed to achieve all that, and we invested very heavily in the company in the 1980s and early 90s in terms of new equipment to enable it to remain successful with the new engine that came on board in the 1990s.
The factory, it made a great contribution to the area. It gradually dropped in time as the numbers dropped. When I started, there were 2,500 people working there. When I last was there, it was 80. So it didn't, when it was 2,500, it was by far the largest employer in the area. So it was making a massive contribution.
But sadly, I think the next generation will not know who Paxman Diesels was in the town. In fact, I talk to a lot of young people now. I say to them, I work for Paxman, and they're inclined to say, well, who was that? And I'd have to say they were the biggest employer in the town in the 1960s, 70s, and indeed 80s. And I think that history will go. Very sad.
If families have been around long enough, there has to be a connection with one of the great Colchester employers in many instances. And Paxman's being the largest of those engineering firms, the chances are that you're going to find a relation.
Well, it's nice to see the museum has been able to put on an exhibition of Paxman products, and that's at least one memory that will survive. I mean, there's a wonderful website that's been produced by Richard Carr that catalogues the whole history of Paxman at the very outset. Andrew Phillips, of course, is producing books on the Paxman family and the Paxman history. Those will always be there as memories.
There's a lot of history there.
It's a wonderful display, and I congratulate everybody involved in putting it together. Thank you.